Mr. Don Palmer. Hi, Don.
How goes it?
Don?
Okay, the disbursements report for the month of January is $1,885,162, and it represents the following categories: $925,720 for payroll. Professional services is $260,892. Of that, might be of interest is that it includes things like 6 and Jackson Street, Brownfield grant, Egan asbestos cleanup. It did some asbestos cleanup down at the Egan. $15,000 progressive payment for the audit, and Whitcomb 911's quarterly payment, which is significant. Sanitation is $260,578, which is about an average for expense for the month. Grants was $59,230, of which we paid the annual airport fees. It's $47,000 of it.
These are grants from the city.
From the city to them, yes. Thanks for the clarification. Supplies, $35,629. Construction, which is all of the ball fields, at $27,533. Vehicles, 2 police vehicles at $60,102, or outfitting those now.
Does that include the outfitting, or was that just
the car? Yeah. By the time they outfit them, you're into it about $50,000.
Okay.
We do most of that in-house.
All right.
Utilities, $86,073, $31,195 for some sewer gates, stainless steel gates. There's 2 of those. Or, I don't know if there's 2. There's some gates. I don't remember how many there were of that. Improvements, $2,560, and insurance, $13,013, for a total of $1,762,525, which represents about 93% of the expenditures in those categories for the total month of January. Try to capsulize all those. With that, we have the Revenue and Treasurer's report, so if you have any questions, let me know.
Mark?
I don't have any questions.
There you go.
Seems business is a business.
I'm good.
You want to sign that?
You did a good job of explaining. We looked at professional services of almost $261,000, but you did a good job explaining where that's at. So you take the questions away from us when you answer the questions before we ask them, so that's good.
Try to capsulize those and narrow them down.
You've been at this long enough to know what we're going to ask. Huh?
Okay, now we've got Walter, Steed, Art, and Dan. Or is
I
this,
got Walter down as chairperson.
Here, will you just cross it out and put the right names down? I have to have Cassie update that. I don't think she did from the last thing. I thought she did. I didn't even look, so I apologize. Sometimes you do, and then you save it, or don't save it, and it doesn't happen.
What?
She doesn't override it, save it, so.
Bill.
Okay, thank you, Don.
Thank you.
thanks.
Okay, next item is one that we've been talking about for a little while. It's the Steiner White Avenue Pedestrian Underpass Study. This is the Phase 2 report, and it's being presented by Bill Belknap as well as Tom Grundon. Welcome, gentlemen. Well, hi, Bill, again.
Hi, Tom.
Gentlemen,
You didn't have to change seats.
you changed
I
hats.
feel a little better talking this way than from the corner. So, as you mentioned, this is a topic that's been under discussion for some time, which is the consideration of a potential pedestrian bicycle underpass of Highway 8 near the Steiner and White Avenue intersection with Highway 8. So as we mentioned, it's been under consideration for some time. Highway 8 serves as a significant barrier to access to the larger portion of the Paradise Path located south of Highway 8. There was a class project that was completed in 2011 that looked at this potential underpass, concluded it was feasible based upon the students' work, and provided some preliminary cost estimates that we did feel needed to be verified by professional engineers. This underpass was identified as a high priority project in the recent Moscow on the Move transportation plan, as well as the #1 priority for the Paradise Path task force. So just to provide a little bit of background, again, we're looking at Paradise Path shown on the green line here on the screen, and again, that is located along the south side of Highway 8 here in the section between the South Couplet and the city limit boundary. And obviously we have a large portion that highway serves as a barrier in that location, and we have a large portion of the community that is located north of the highway. A lot of the residential development within the community is either north and east of the downtown core, and the highway serves as an impediment for access to the pathway system to utilize that either for destinations in town or off to Pullman or off to Troy out to the east. And so that location was identified at the Steiner and White as somewhat centrally located to that developed area between Mountain View and downtown as a location, and the existing bridge structure as the structure to provide a separated grade crossing to the pathway facility. As I mentioned before, that crossing improvement was identified in the transportation plan as well, and again, a high priority project for the Paradise Path Task Force. On October 6th of last year, the council approved a phased study approach. There were 3 phases. One was to validate the hydrologic and hydraulic assessments to ensure that it wouldn't impact flooding in the area. Phase 2 was to assess the constructability and develop a concept design and a cost estimate for the underpass. And Phase 3 was to assess the environmental impacts and permitting requirements primarily related to wetland disturbances that may occur during construction. Terragraphics Engineering was selected to conduct that assessment. In November of last year, staff brought forward the Phase 1 findings that concluded that there were no adverse flood impacts from the proposed underpass. At that point in time, council approved moving forward with Phases 2 and 3, and so today's the report concluding those items. For the Phase 1 assessment, just a reminder, the pathway indicated, the study indicated the pathway would have no adverse flood impacts on flood events. There's a table in the memo that shows both current upstream and downstream flood elevations with the proposed underpass structure. There's some fairly minor impacts on low-level events at the 2 to 10-year event. And then once you get into the higher level events and the floodwaters have now reached the pathway surface and that additional conveyance is available, you'll see that for the 50 and 100-year events, there essentially is no impact from the pre- and post-project conditions. The study also concluded the pathway would likely be inundated an average of 3.4 days per year with an average consecutive inundation of 1.9 days per year. And so that'll occur when the flows in the creek reach 100 CFS, which is that red line there shown on the screen. So you can see these are 2-year increments here, and so you can see the 2 spring typically are higher flow events or in the spring runoff time period. So you can see in those instances where that flow rate would exceed it and the elevations would overtop the pathway. So there would be some temporary short-term closures, but of course that's during the time periods of the year generally where there's less pedestrian and bicycle activity due to those weather conditions. As we looked at the concept design for the underpass, we did look at the surrounding area and the plan underneath the transportation plan for circulation. There are north-south sections of Paradise Path that run really from Mountain View Park past Good Samaritan, and there's a section that goes along the north edge of the Joseph Street Ballfield project, and now a new pathway along the east edge of the Ballfield project connecting with Meadow, and then the Heron's Hideout segment that comes over here to Mountain View, opposite of the fairgrounds property. The intent was for a crossing at that point through the fairgrounds down south, and then moving on over to this crossing point here at Steiner and White. So when we looked at the overall project area, we focused really at the path here to the fairground entryway. And so this is what's shown as the scope of the project that's included in the study, picking up here at the fairgrounds entry drive, and then continuing on to the intersection with the Paradise Path here located on the south side of Highway 8. Looking at a little more detail, and these are all included in the packet so you can look at it in more detail, but this is the proposed underpass concept alignment. So you can see the vertical alignment with the elevation of the crossing underneath through the bridge structure, and then 8% grades coming up and out to match with the existing grade elevations on both sides of the crossing location. It's designed as a 10-foot wide pathway. And looking at a little more detail, there are some section details showing the concrete retaining wall underneath the bridge structure and both the approaches on the downstream side moving out from underneath the bridge structure, and then on the uphill side as you come up to White, there are some slopes that need to be retained as you come up out of there to match to the existing grade of the roadway on the White Avenue side of the intersection. There's a cost estimate that you can't read on the screen that's also included in the packet. Largely that the base project is shown at $285,000, if I recall correctly. That is the cost to extend from Hanson Avenue, which is the first intersection they actually reach east of the bridgeway. That was the kind of the shorter, if you wanted to curtail the project down, that was an intersection location where a crossing could be placed and a ped drop to cross on White Avenue over to the existing sidewalk on the south. That would provide an opportunity for pedestrians and cyclists that are maybe approaching, predominantly cyclists that may be approaching from the east, to be able to gain an access of entry and all the way down underneath the bridge structure and crossing. There's an additional $60,000 estimate of cost to continue that pathway from Hanson then to the Fairgrounds intersection. So the total project was, I think, approximately $345,000 in total cost to do sidewalk improvements and separated pathway construction all the way to that from the Fairgrounds driveway to the crossing and tying into Paradise Path. We also, as indicated, conducted a wetland delineation. There were just a few small minor areas of wetlands that were delineated within the anticipated disturbed area of the project, largely here located on the south side of Highway 8, where an existing culvert crossing was going to have to be relocated in a small area of wetlands. The area of disturbance was much less than 1/10 of an acre, and so there would be no wetland mitigation required as part of the project. So I guess to summarize some of the conclusions from the study did indicate the underpass is feasible and would not present any adverse flood impacts. It does indicate that the pathway would be inundated again, that approximately 3.4 days per year.
Today being one of them.
I don't know if today I haven't looked at the flow.
There's a lot of water out there right now.
Yeah. I don't know what the current flow rate is right now at the gauge station. I could probably take a look and see if by tomorrow we could probably give you an indication of what that level is. But it is that 100 CFS at the downstream gauge station at Perimeter Drive that would be the typical elevation where you'd see that inundation. And again, generally for short duration, approximately 2 days per year. I think as Terragraphics reviewed all the historical gauge data, they concluded the longest period of inundation on record was about 11 days, that it was over the 100 CFS number, but on average it would be about 2 days per year. And if you looked at the graph, actually in the last 2 years it would not have been inundated during the last 2 years' records. There is very limited wetland impact, and there would be no wetland mitigation that would be required as part of the project. And again, that construction cost estimate is at $285,000 for the underpass and base approaches, and then $60,000 to extend that pathway to the Fairgrounds property. I guess finally, as staff looks at this, it appears the project would be a good candidate for the Idaho Community Choices grant program. That grant program is the one that's funding the pedestrian improvements at the middle school. So that was a little over $480,000 project, I believe, or in that $400,000 range.
What would be the potential grant money available for that?
These projects are up to $500,000 under the Community Choices program, and it's a 7.64% minimum match. So if you were to do the total project between base and the additional pathway, that's approximately $26,000 for the required minimum match. Obviously, any additional match that can be provided can make the application more competitive.
With the, you mentioned that very limited wetland impact. Who is that? Wetlands, were they designated by the feds or by the state or by the city?
Well, Terragrex has a wetland delineation expert that actually visited the site, did all the survey, and identified the areas, did soil tests to identify what wetland areas would be mitigated. And so we had that delineation performed, and any grant-funded project will have to have that delineation, so we have that completed. Okay. It's under the jurisdiction of the Corps of Engineers, so they administer the wetland program. But the delineation that we did is this project was done by Terragraphics with their wetland experts.
Okay.
So that's all staff has at the moment on this project, and happy to hear any comments that the committee may have.
Well, I'm glad to see things are moving forward so briskly, and for a project that's high in priority for both Paradise Pass / Pathways people and the City Council, it's good to see progress. And for my point, I'd like to receive the report and say, go forth and look into the grant funding possibilities for it. And I think bringing it forward as a regular item on the City Council agenda is the way to go here for a project this high in profile, so that everybody can be on the same page with it.
John?
I pretty much agree with Art. When you mentioned the funding possibilities, I didn't hear you say anything about a match.
A 7.64%
okay.
is the minimum match, so for the $345,000 project, that would equate to $26,000, a little over $26,000 for match.
Over probably the year that it would take to put it in or whatever.
Correct. And I think at this point, the next round of funding for community choices is for FY18 that begins in, I think, July of 17 for the state. So
Okay.
It's several years out that would allow time for the city to accumulate funding for that match.
Sounds good to me. I agree with Art. Let's put it on the regular agenda so we can all get a crack at hearing about this again. I think the work that's been done has been done very well, very quickly, and very reasonably. So,
Tom, did you have anything you'd like to add to this discussion?
No, just on behalf of the Paradise Path Task Force membership, they're extremely excited about it, 110% supportive, and think it'd be a great improvement and asset for our community, bike riders, pedestrians, and what have you.
A couple of one question in particular is how much anticipated maintenance would be required? Because every time we get a little flood through there, I could see where there's going to need to be quite a bit of cleaning would need to be done.
Well, we'd take our toolcat in with the power sweeper on it as needed and give it the occasional brush up, just like we do now with anywhere that gets dirty or gravel on it and so forth. So nothing more than minor maintenance.
Okay, and I noticed in the design specs that it does indicate flush-mounted lighting within the passage itself. And there is the indication of some bollard lighting on the approaches.
Luminaires at the intersections where the path would come up and either intersect on the south side with the existing pathway, so at night it just would be better lit if somebody's coming up.
Because I am very concerned about the safety involved at nighttime. Yes. That has the potential to be an area that could present some problems without at least lighting, good lighting involved in it. So,
correct.
Glad to hear about the. Go ahead, John.
just one more question for Tom.
Yes,
I live down in that neighborhood. In fact, the creek kind of bypasses or goes by my backyard, and we end up with a tremendous amount of growth as far as cattails, whatever. Would we be keeping that growth cut down underneath the bridge, or would we be letting it grow? Or do you know?
Well, there isn't a lot of growth under the bridge, John.
Okay.
As I understand it, with the lack of daylight there, it stays pretty naked, if you will. But underneath there, we would certainly focus on keeping it clear, I would
Okay.
think.
Yeah, that's.
Right.
Yeah.
But of course, the approaches as you drop down the bank could be an area like John's talking
Yeah,
about.
correct.
Which I would assume that would take some more maintenance to keep that cut back and appropriate.
Correct.
Okay.
Maybe Don would do that. Don might do that for us.
Yeah, right. Actually, I think since you're living so close to it, that would be an opportunity for you to
I'm
give
too
back to the
emotionally
community.
involved. Too emotionally involved.
All right, well, let's go ahead and move this to the regular agenda item, and we can vet this out a little more next week at the council meeting.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to have Ty Thompson's going to come up. He's going to visit with us about the 2014 Cross Connection, the control program report, and proposed additions to the Moscow City Code.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, so here we are. Yes, I'll be talking about the Cross Connection Control Program report here for 2014. We'll go ahead and start off and remind everyone what a cross connection is. That is any connection, actual or potential, to the public water system where a contaminant could enter and contaminate the public water supply. Backflow is the process through which that could happen, which is water and anything in that water flowing in the wrong direction, in the opposite or intended direction.
For clarification, before you really get into it, let me ask you this question. When we talk about cross-connection control, there's some areas where our water mains or our water lines actually cross over sewer lines, and there's a specific distance that has to be required in separation between the two. Is this address that also, or is this just...
That is a separate issue.
That's a separate issue?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
So, cross-connection control program is required by Idaho DEQ rules, and it requires us, the city, as a water purveyor, to implement and enforce that program, and that's in order to protect the public water supply, as I said, against contamination and pollution from those cross connections. And that's the most important thing. It is to protect public health. It can and does happen, and we want to prevent that from happening here in the city of Moscow. The program must include, at a minimum, an inspection program requiring the installation and adequate operation of backflow prevention assemblies, annual testing and inspection of those installed assemblies. We're required to discontinue water service where suitable protection is not provided. And in the case that an assembly does fail the required test, it must be repaired, replaced, or isolated within 10 business days. And that's something that we addressed last year.
Now, for example, you're talking here about businesses, hospitals, residences, everything?
Correct. Anywhere where a backflow assembly is required to be installed must follow all of these rules and requirements. So we'll get into the numbers here. There were over 2,000 assemblies tested in the city of Moscow last year. We expect this trend to continue as we move with that inspection program and new installations. So that's a good thing. 152 of those tests failed the initial test, which is 7.6 of the total. You can see there's a slight increase there. It's hard to tell if that's an actual trend or if that scale on the left there was a full 0 to 8, that line would look a little bit flatter, but it has increased. And so this is evidence that the program is necessary to continue to protect against backflow. Notifications, 1066 were sent for the first notices, and that's before the due date. After that, a second notice is sent as a reminder that the date has come and passed. 255, and then only 28 of the third and final notices. So this decrease that we're seeing here, I think, is not unexpected, and that's due to the consistently enforced program. People know that it's coming and that it's going to happen, and that's as well as irrigation systems are often tested when they're started up in the spring before their due date comes. So that helps with not needing that second and third notices, as I said, as people have gotten used to it and just have it scheduled. It's just done. So we expect this trend to kind of continue, but as more assemblies come, then we'll see where those numbers ended up. But it's good to see those.
You talked about your third, and how many third notices you sent out. How many systems did you have to disconnect that never...
We did not have to disconnect any. I worked very hard to make sure that doesn't happen. Phone calls, site visits, giving people more time if it's needed. That's not what we want to do. The goal is to protect the water supply, not to shut off people's water. So
thank you for that.
Oh, you bet. No one wants to be the bad guy. There were a lot of successes this year. You know, as the staff, we continue to evaluate the program and see if there are things that we can do to make it more efficient and effective. And, you know, it's obvious that we've done a good job of that, as evidenced by the numbers. 8.3% more assemblies tested than in 2013, and almost 19% fewer notices required. You know, there are some other improvements that are directly related to the revisions to Title VII, Chapter 9, which is the city code that governs cross connections, that implements those state requirements. And, you know, they're not as easily quantified, but they're equally important to the success of the program, and I'll talk about a few of those specifically here. Section 9-4I of that code requires notification when an assembly fails the test within 1 business day. And that, the backflow assembly tester, or the BAT, has to notify city staff as well as the owner. And this is to make sure that we are in compliance with those rules with ADEPA 580108 that requires that 10 days, 10 business days for that to be repaired. And this has been really successful. Didn't have any issues with this with notifications from the tester, so that was a good thing. Sections 9-4F and G require that an assembly has to be tagged after it's tested. And this is just a simple and cheap way of communication between the BATs, us, the water purveyor, and the customers to know if it's tested or not. I can stop right by anyone's place and say, yes, they stopped by at this date and it passed, so thank you very much. I'll stop bothering you and ask the tester for a report. So that's been very successful. We've been really happy with that. Excuse me. I jumped ahead of myself there. So here's where we talked about the assemblies be tagged, and that's where we can easily tell whether an assembly's been tested or not. That's been great, and the BATs have done a great job of that with very little resistance, and everyone's been really happy. That's also helped cut down on duplicate tests where someone has called and asked for a couple quotes from people, from testers, which happened a couple times in 2013, and that was all but eliminated in 2014. They can go and see that it was tested and say, thanks for calling, but it's already been taken care of. Initial test required upon installation for Section 9-4F, excuse me, and upon installation, it is required that assemblies be tested to make sure that they are actually working. In 2014, there were 2 newly installed assemblies that did fail that initial test, and then were either cleaned or repaired as needed. And consistent notification from the Community Development Department has been extremely important to that. Leora Farai and Justin Goodwin have done a great job of helping us out there for newly installed assemblies. So thank you to them. The internal backflow assemblies, that's all city-owned assemblies, have to follow the same requirements as all privately owned assemblies. There are 71 throughout the city, and all of those passed the required testing. We made several corrections with regards to installation, orientation, and accessibility in case they need to be repaired. And the Water Department and Parks Department staff worked together fantastically on that. A few people to talk about there. Mike Parker and Wes Peterson from the Water Department have done a great job. And the Parks Department staff, Scott Carlson and Jim Allen, and I know there were other guys that would hop in with a shovel when they would see our staff doing things, and they've worked great together, so that's been really nice. Here's just an example here. The one on the left, this is an orientation issue. It's twisted about its axis, and the manufacturer's guidelines say that it has to be upright, as you see on the right here. So that was a fairly easy correction, but nonetheless one that needed to be done. This one is a little bit easier to see maybe why the correction needed to be made here. Assemblies are not supposed to be submerged. This one we thought was groundwater seeping into the box there. It actually turned out it was a leak, so we identified a leak and cleaned that up. You can also see the one on the on the left is rusted, and that's part of the reason, we don't want that, those submerged. A new assembly was installed that's actually a better fit here. If you can see the two different checks, and I'm not sure which one's the laser pointer here. Thank you. There's one here on the top, that's the first check, and there's another one that's submerged on the bottom. So if that needed repaired, that's extremely difficult to get it to. This one has both checks with top access, and so much better situation there.
What does one of those cost?
That one right there, I believe, is 1.5 inches, and that's going to be in the 150 to 225 range, depending on the assembly. So there's a range, but for most of them that you'll see throughout the city, they're going to be not much bigger than that. So $100 to $250 is a fair range.
And that charge is absorbed by the customer.
That's correct. So there were a few challenges that came about, which, are places where we can improve the program. As I said, we're always looking to make it a more effective and efficient program. Customer compliance is one, communication with backflow assembly testers, and setting and modifying test due dates. And I'll go through those now. So overall, because you can see there, 90% of the assemblies were completed, had the test completed or scheduled after the second notice was received, which is a slight improvement over the previous year, but overall pretty good, and we expect that to continue to get better as the program continues to be consistently enforced. And some of the reasons that those other ones can be missed is change of ownership. Tracking down a new owner, they didn't get the notification, or out of town, on sabbatical. I've come across a lot of those things. Sometimes people forget. Sometimes people just don't want to comply. So those are some of the challenges that we come across with that. In general, the backflow assembly testers that we work with do a great job. The number one program comes from submitting backflow assembly tests that are passed. As I said, the failed assemblies were notified of those really quickly because of it's codified that they have to. Sometimes this can take a long time to get the passing test reports, and that can result in sending a second notification or a third notification to a customer who's already done their part to get the test done, and sometimes they don't take that as...
The backflow tester not only tags it as having been tested and passed or failed, say it just passed, but they also submit paperwork to the city indicating that it's been tested too.
That's right. That is a requirement of testers through their licensure. Test due dates were an issue. For 2014, a test due date of June 30th was set for all irrigation assemblies, and the number one reason for that was to protect public health, to ensure that the backflow assemblies on lawn irrigation systems were working during the time that they're in use, during the irrigation season, which typically starts in June. And additionally, there were some concerns of backflow assembly testers with the test due dates that were in the fall. There's a conflict there with them winterizing systems. The change that we made was based on Section 9-3A of Title 7, Chapter 9, which states that the Public Works Director or designee shall adopt rules and regulations as necessary to carry out the provisions of the chapter. And this was challenged by one of the customers whose date was changed. That one had previously been set as a due date in August, and that was moved forward. There are some others who had due dates that were in April or May who were moved the other way. So, but this customer challenged that. So that was discussed with City Attorney Rod Hall, and he indicated that any reasonable person could interpret annual as either meaning covering the period of 12 months, so in this case August to August, or occurring or happening once a year or every year. And since those are both reasonable and common definitions of the term annual, and that it was not explicitly stated in code that the city has the authority to set or modify a due date. The customers were allowed to retain the due date from the previous year if they requested so, and some of those are as late in the year as August 31st. Why is this a problem? Well, number one, assemblies can be used for the entire irrigation system while in failed state and then tested right before being shut down, which really does not protect the system. It puts the water supply at risk, and the main reason for this is most irrigation system assemblies are located outdoors. They're exposed to freezing temperatures throughout the winter, and that can damage the assembly, either the internal parts or sometimes the whole assembly. I've seen them crack completely open. Those same freezing temperatures and winterization efforts by the contractors in the fall makes it difficult to schedule a complete. If it's 5 degrees out, which did happen in November, that can make it really tough to make that test happen. And at that time, they are in the thick of their winterization processes. And many of the BITs that I talked to said they would prefer not to have to worry about tests at that time. And it can happen that an irrigation system is winterized before the test is performed, and that does not relieve the requirement that the test has to be performed. It says it has to be tested annually, every year. And so this did happen twice this year, and customers had to incur extra costs to have the system recharged so that they could test it and then winterized again, which is unfortunate. Also, assemblies that are not irrigation systems, with the due date near the end of the year, they don't have the same buffer that you can have for those in the middle of the year if there are scheduling difficulties, errors, or omissions, the things we talked about earlier. And in that case, and especially if it's for those on fire suppression systems, fire sprinkler systems, there's additional rules that require licensure to work on those systems, and the only companies that have both of those licensures are out of Spokane, and so those are a little more costly, and especially when you add a rush charge on there from them to get to Spokane to Moscow, that can add up. By either definition of annual, they have to be tested by December 31st, or water service can be disconnected. So because of those reasons, the risk to public health, some of the confusion, different due dates, and the potential for unnecessary costs for citizens, staff is planning to propose to City Council a legislative amendment to Title VII, Chapter 9 that allows the city to set and modify test due dates. So before I move on to that, are there any questions about the report?
Other than irrigation and fire suppression, what are some other examples where backflows are needed?
Okay. Boilers. Boilers require a reduced pressure because of the pressure that they build, and that water can become stagnant there. Soda machines require that. Buildings that are over 30 feet tall above the water face, because that can cause pressure as that water gains height. So there's a few of them. Laboratories, hospitals, anywhere where there's a serious potential for chemical or biological contamination.
I'm fairly sure that when you talk to a customer, you do inform them that the city is under the same restrictions as far as, so it's not one of those things that we have to do but you don't.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's been the point of emphasis for me, to make sure that all city assemblies are in fantastic working order. That's something that would be really bad if something were to happen and it came on our end. I wouldn't feel very good about that.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that's important to stress is that this is not an ordinance that the city of Moscow decided to create. This is an adoption of a state requirement.
Sure. It's been passed down to us, and we're going to do our best to make sure that happens.
So how do you know you've identified all of the underground sprinkler systems?
We don't, and that's part of the continued inspection program. is to make sure that, as best as we can, that we can identify those. There are some tools that we have. The best one is just to be out there, and if you see an irrigation system going, and as I see these hundreds and eventually thousands of test reports come through, sometimes they'll just make a note and say 1066. I'll go see if that one is. Also, the meter readers have had a program where they will identify if they see any sign of that, and we can compare that with the database to see if they do indeed have the required protection.
I assume then that also includes the small pools and water features that people have on their property?
Potentially. It depends on how those are fed. If they are directly fed and into the plumbing system, I believe that those should be protected. That's going to be a difficult thing to find. If they're just fed by a hose, then that would be a non-underground connection. So, but that's something that I haven't come across.
Most water features are self-contained. If you get low on water, you fill them up with a hose, then they're self-contained and recirculate.
Right. Yeah, we do have, I know there's at least one that's the city one over on Alturas Drive, and that one is fed, and that's protected by a backflow assembly. So,
Carry on.
any others? Okay, well.
Go on.
So, on to the proposed additions to Moscow City Code, Title VII, Chapter 9. It will be to Section 9-4, which covers the use of a backflow prevention assembly. The first one will be Section H, and that will require all installed assemblies protecting underground irrigation systems shall be tested within 10 business days of annual recharge or startup, and no later than June 30th of each year. Section I would be that all other installed assemblies, non-irrigation system assemblies, shall be tested no later than September 30th of each year, and that still gives us that buffer that we were talking about, not running up against the end of the year. And Section J would be that the Public Works Director or designee shall have the authority to set and modify due dates by which assemblies required by the chapter must be completed. And after that, everything would be bumped down KLM. Those are already standing. Are there any questions about those? That's all.
That's a good report.
Well, thanks.
Good job. Thank you, Ty. I appreciate that.
I guess I'll go ahead and let you know our recommendations here.
I'm sorry.
I'll go ahead and finish up here and give you the stacked recommendations. I apologize. Staff recommends that the committee accept the Cross Connection Control Program report and forward the proposed additions to Moscow City Code, Title VII, Chapter 9, to a full City Council with a recommendation for approval. Now, are there any questions?
That's it.
I promise.
Well,
Do you have anything else?
No, I know more about backflow and the reasons for them than I ever have, and so when people come to me complaining, I probably won't make them any happier, but I can give them more accurate answers as to why they're needed, and they're going to continually be needed, and we're going to continually test, and if they don't think their neighbor is in compliance, give you a call.
Absolutely.
And
And if they're not sure if they're in compliance, have them give me a call. I have had, there were a couple people that called me up and said, I don't know if I'm protected, and that was great. That was people wanting on their own to follow the rules and to make sure that they're not a part of the problem.
now here's a question for you. In front of my house last winter before last, the water line broke, and the city came in and fixed it.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, do they also test the backflow?
No, and that's that's a good point. That's the reason that all of these have to be tested annually. If a break like that can be a cause for a backflow event. Actually, last month there were two breaks in the city where the water had to be shut off. We tried to repair them live, and so that's a point where the pressure can drop to zero, and that's where that can happen. But no, they don't necessarily go at that time of a break. and go do any additional
Is that something that
testing.
should be done?
Well, if they're tested annually and made sure that they're working, then it shouldn't have to be. But that's a good question. That's something that I can definitely
Okay.
look into further.
I had no problem and have had no problem. My backflow must be working because I haven't heard from the city. But, I mean, I was without water for, a day,
Sure.
and my front yard and the street had plenty of water.
Our guys do a great job of making those repairs and doing their best to do it and keep that live so that they don't lose pressure, but it does happen.
Yeah. Well, I think
I'm good with.
You good with it?
I'm good with going forth after reading through the explanations and seeing that with the language, especially of section H, that it won't overload the inspectors and it'll kind of string itself out along through startup season. So I'm good with moving it on to the full city council with a recommendation for approval.
Okay, we will do that and repeat the fact that in our earlier discussion that you and I had before we started the meeting is that you have had discussions with the testers and that they are not feeling overburdened by having to meet that early date.
Right, that's what I understood. I have spoke with those that I've been in contact with and let them know that that this is something that could be coming, and I think that it's very doable with a little bit of planning and getting the customers aware. That will be part of it, is letting everyone who's affected by this know to get it scheduled and get on it early so that we don't run into crunch time.
Okay, sounds good. We'll send this to the regular agenda item for next week, and thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
I see we have no other agenda items, and we don't even have any reports. You want to you want to talk about anything? We have a little bit of time here.
You want to hear me talk?
No, not really. Okay, well then, here comes the city attorney.
Just going to make sure that you probably put a notice, remind that the city council is Tuesday rather than Monday.
Thank you very much. A reminder, because of a holiday, official holiday on Monday, city council is Tuesday, week from tomorrow. Okay, no other business to come before this committee? We stand adjourned.